At 9:47 in the morning on June 4, 1942, Commander Joseph Rochefort stood exhausted but unwavering in the cold basement of the 14th Naval District Headquarters at Pearl Harbor, staring at a sprawling map of the Pacific Ocean that displayed the positions of every American vessel within 1,000 miles of Midway Atoll, knowing that in roughly 90 minutes American dive bombers would either locate the Japanese carrier strike force or run out of fuel searching for it, and that the outcome of that search would determine whether the United States preserved a fragile foothold in the Pacific or surrendered the entire ocean to Japanese control for the next decade. He had gone 36 hours without sleep, consuming too much coffee, eating almost nothing, and straining his eyes over endless pages of intercepted Japanese radio messages. Yet none of that mattered now because he had spent 6 relentless months breaking into the enemy's most secure communication system, the Japanese Naval Code JN-25B, and now possessed a near-complete understanding of Japan's intentions, fleet composition, and projected movements, knowledge that meant nothing if American pilots failed to act on it in the shrinking window of opportunity that remained. Japanese commanders believed Americans incapable of such warfare, dismissing them as soft, undisciplined, and technically inferior, assumptions reinforced by Japan's rapid early war victories at Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, Wake Island, and the sweeping advance across the Pacific. Even Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who understood American industrial capacity from his time studying at Harvard and serving in Washington, had developed a low opinion of American naval professionalism and thought American officers were more focused on comfort than combat, assumptions that shaped Japanese war planning, causing Yamamoto to believe American carriers would be sitting complacently in port during the Pearl Harbor attack and that American reactions to any Japanese initiative would be plodding and conventional. This confidence led the Japanese to disperse their fleets across vast distances, certain that Americans lacked both the intelligence capability and tactical sophistication to locate them until it was far too late. Yet the very first American to die because of Japanese underestimation was First Lieutenant George Cannon, who on December 7, 1941, 14 hours after Pearl Harbor, refused evacuation after being mortally wounded at Midway, directing his battery's fire for 40 minutes despite catastrophic injuries and forcing Japanese destroyers to withdraw earlier than planned. His sacrifice symbolized a reality Japanese planners repeatedly failed to grasp, that Americans, when forced to defend, fought harder and longer than expected, and that each Japanese victory cost more than Tokyo acknowledged. Still, Japan's early conquests appeared unstoppable until the one American advantage Japan had discounted began to take shape: intelligence. Admiral Chester Nimitz understood that Japan's victories were tactical, not strategic, and that Japanese supply lines were dangerously overextended. Most importantly, Nimitz had cryptanalysts like Rochefort, whose rare combination of language fluency, cultural understanding, and cryptanalytic skill made him uniquely valuable. Station Hypo, hidden in a frigid basement, staffed with language specialists, radio operators, mathematicians, and even former battleship band musicians who excelled at pattern recognition, became the epicenter of America's intelligence war. Breaking JN-25B was almost impossibly complex, requiring the separation of 5-digit code groups from random additive numbers and the interpretation of culturally specific references even after decryption. But by April 1942, Hypo was reading nearly 40% of Japanese naval traffic, enough to identify preparations for a massive operation targeting a location designated AF. Rochefort became convinced that AF meant Midway, based on several clues, including weather reports matching Midway's conditions, references to future airfield construction, and patterns in Japanese geographic designators. But Washington disagreed, insisting AF might refer to the Aleutians, the West Coast, or other regions, creating a dangerous intelligence divide. Nimitz could not afford uncertainty. He had only 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the badly damaged Yorktown, against at least 4 Japanese fleet carriers and possibly more. A single miscalculation would be fatal. To settle the dispute, Rochefort proposed a deception. Midway would broadcast in plain English that its water distillation plant had failed and supplies were low. If Japanese intelligence intercepted the false report and relayed it using JN-25B, and Hypo decrypted the message, any reference to AF being short on water would confirm AF as Midway. The plan worked flawlessly. Within 48 hours, a decrypted Japanese message reported that AF is short of fresh water. Nimitz had the proof he needed. He concentrated his carriers northeast of Midway at a location called Point Luck, positioning them so they could ambush the Japanese fleet approaching from the northwest, while the Japanese assault force, carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, and invasion troops advanced confidently, unaware their every move had been revealed. Yorktown, nearly crippled at the Coral Sea 2 weeks earlier, was repaired in 72 hours by 1,400 shipyard workers performing a miracle of wartime engineering, enabling her to join Enterprise and Hornet at Point Luck by June 2nd. On June 3rd, a PBY patrol plane sighted the Japanese invasion force, confirming the accuracy of Rochefort's predictions. Before dawn on June 4th, radar at Midway detected incoming Japanese aircraft, and at 0552 a PBY sent the first sighting of the Japanese carrier force. At 0600 Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher ordered every available American aircraft launched immediately. Japanese planes bombed Midway at 0630, and although the island took damage, its airfield remained operational. Meanwhile, American torpedo squadrons launched piecemeal, attacking bravely but disastrously, with 41 of 41 torpedo bombers shot down without scoring a single hit, their sacrifice dragging Japanese fighter cover to sea level and exhausting Japanese pilots. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky, leading 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise, reached the expected intercept point at 0920 only to find empty ocean. With fuel running low and no sign of the enemy, he made a critical decision to continue the search for 15 more minutes. At 0955, by sheer intuition and tactical reasoning, he spotted the destroyer Ayrshire racing to rejoin the fleet after depth charging an American submarine. Concluding that the destroyer must be heading toward the carriers, McClusky followed its wake directly to the Japanese fleet. At 10:22, McClusky and his pilots dove on Kaga and Akagi at the exact moment when Japanese carriers were at their most vulnerable. Flight decks cluttered with fueled aircraft, bombs and torpedoes strewn about, and hangars full of planes being rearmed following Nagumo's indecision about whether to strike Midway again or rearm for an attack on the newly detected American carriers. McClusky's dive bombers struck Kaga with multiple bombs, igniting fuel and munitions that detonated in a chain of catastrophic explosions. Lieutenant Richard Best, noticing that all bombers were mistakenly diving on Kaga, redirected his small section toward Akagi and delivered a fatal hit to the carrier's hangar deck, triggering fires that raged uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Yorktown's dive bombers hit Soryu with 3 devastating bombs, destroying her within minutes. In 4 extraordinary minutes, from 10:22 to 10:26, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers were mortally hit, their hangars erupting into infernos. The last operational carrier, Hiryu, launched 2 counterstrikes that badly damaged Yorktown, but she too was located and destroyed by Enterprise dive bombers later that afternoon. The myth of the 5 fatal minutes, which claimed Japanese carriers were moments from launching their own strike, has been debunked by modern scholarship, particularly the work of Parshall and Tully in Shattered Sword, which shows that Japanese decks were largely empty and aircraft were still in hangars being rearmed. Operational reality meant Nagumo was still 30 to 45 minutes from launching. Nevertheless, the timing of the American attack was decisive. Admiral Nagumo, watching his burning carriers from the cruiser Nagara, could not understand how American dive bombers had arrived simultaneously from multiple carriers without detection, how they had found the fleet despite constant Japanese maneuvering, or how they had struck at the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. He did not know that Station Hypo had uncovered Japan's timetable down to the hour, or that American carriers were positioned exactly where Japanese planners least expected. He assumed luck, In truth, it was intelligence. When Yamamoto learned of the disaster at 11:30 a.m., he attempted to salvage something by ordering his dispersed forces to converge for a night battle, an environment where Japanese gunnery dominance traditionally prevailed, but American carriers avoided engagement. By June 5 he accepted defeat and ordered withdrawal. The Japanese losses, 4 fleet carriers, a heavy cruiser, over 3,000 men, and irreplaceable elite aviators, crippled Japan's ability to wage offensive carrier warfare. American losses, though painful, were replaceable. Yorktown, hit repeatedly, was sunk by submarine I-168 on June 6, along with destroyer Hammond, but the strategic exchange overwhelmingly favored the United States. The psychological impact on Japan was immense. An empire that had known only victory now confronted a humiliating defeat caused not by luck but by American intelligence, preparation, and tactical adaptability. Japanese leadership concealed the defeat from the public, quarantined survivors, falsified casualty reports, and revised doctrines, belatedly acknowledging carriers as the decisive arm of naval warfare, though too late to matter. By contrast, the United States seized the initiative, launching its first major offensive at Guadalcanal in August 1942, beginning a brutal campaign that drained Japanese resources faster than they could be replaced. The death of Yamamoto in April 1943, made possible because his itinerary was transmitted using the same compromised code system, further damaged Japanese command structure. Rochefort, however, received no recognition. Instead, Washington removed him from Station Hypo due to political jealousy and bureaucratic resentment, assigning him to meaningless posts despite his intelligence having saved the Pacific Fleet. Only decades later did the U.S. government acknowledge his contributions, far too late for Rochefort himself, who died believing his work had been disregarded. Meanwhile, McClusky and Best, whose actions directly determined the outcome of the battle, paid high personal costs. McClusky wounded by enemy fire, Best permanently disabled by toxic oxygen inhalation during his dive on Akagi. Nimitz, who relied heavily on intelligence to shape Pacific strategy, continued directing the war until Japan's surrender aboard the USS Missouri. Spruance, whose calm leadership at Midway proved indispensable, went on to lead some of the war's most complex operations. Ultimately, Midway shattered Japanese assumptions of superiority and demonstrated that information, more than numbers, more than machines, was the ultimate force multiplier. It proved that American cryptanalysts, pilots, and commanders could overcome overwhelming odds when armed with accurate intelligence and willing to take calculated risks. The battle turned on the decisions of individuals, Rochefort breaking codes in a cold basement, McClusky choosing to keep searching with fuel nearly gone, Best improvising mid-dive, torpedo bomber crews sacrificing themselves to draw fighters low, and Nimitz trusting incomplete intelligence because he understood the minds of the men producing it. Midway ended Japan's offensive expansion and forced its navy into a permanent defensive posture. From that moment onward, Japan reacted while America dictated the pace and direction of the war. The offensive that began at Pearl Harbor ended in fire and steel northwest of Midway because one side understood the other far better than the other understood itself, and because those who had been underestimated turned that underestimation into decisive advantage. Midway endures as the moment when intelligence, courage, risk, and clarity of thought align to change the course of history, and it remains a testament to the power of information and the men who used it to defend a nation in its darkest hour.